Well, we made it through one day of a podcast. Why not try day two? And we have spring football practice takes. They are coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, that's Mitch Sherman. I'm Connor Happer. Here we go for day number 2 of the Locked On Nebraska pod. Thanks for finding us yesterday. I hope there will be some more people finding us along the way. Mitch, I don't get to go to spring practice usually because it happens during my show, but I do get to watch the stream of videos and quotes coming in during my show, which is always a ton of fun.
Quite a show.
So I kind of get to live react. Whoa, what's going on here? Nice throw, nice catch. I saw a lot of Daniel Kaelin yesterday. I don't know if that was just me and how my timeline is curated, but it seemed to be a lot of the other freshman quarterback off the get-go here.
Yeah, so a little bit of how the sausage is made on those things. Nebraska has instructed the media this year to wait until the live viewing period of practice is over, until before the media then unloads the array of content on all of the followers on social media. I think it's because people like me were standing out there on the edge of the field, tweeting videos and photos from the opening 3 minutes of practice while practice was still going on. And it was like a safety hazard for everyone else at practice, because I might get hit by a 325-pound offensive lineman who comes out of his line. So they don't want that. I don't want that. You don't want that. So we now have to leave the Hawks Championship Center before the tweets come in, and then as a result, it all happens in like a 30-second period. Wherever if you're on Twitter at that moment, you're just getting hammered with content. And on Tuesday, it was Danny Kaelin day, so we saw him throw a touchdown. We saw him go deep down the sideline to another true freshman, Ja'Cory Barney. This was good stuff.
Yeah, I tell you what, though, I mean, that backs up a lot of what I've heard in the get-go here of spring ball, that he's been pretty good. That's Daniel Kaelin, the other freshman quarterback that isn't Dylan Raiola. Now everybody wants to watch Dylan too, and I saw a bunch of videos of him, and he did fine. Although there was one of the clips that I saw where he almost threw an interception, and people get a little freaked out about that. Oh, I know, an interception in practice, on your third week or your second week in pads. But it does back up a lot of what I've heard about Daniel Kaelin so far, that he has adjusted well and his accuracy is playing. And so I wasn't particularly surprised when I saw what I saw yesterday.
Accuracy's always been a thing for Kaelin. You remember he won the accuracy challenge at the Elite 11 finals last summer out in California, an event that Dylan Raiola attended and scored higher overall than Kaelin. But we're on like overreaction day here on the Locked On Nebraska pod. I think we're going to make that a theme of this episode. And why not, when we just come out of one of the rare viewing opportunities that we're going to have to see this team practice not just in spring, but all year. I mean, you can count on one hand the number of times that the public via the media gets let in those doors. We see all these curated clips that come out from Nebraska on social media. Well, that's their choosing, and it's all done for a reason, to present the things they want to present, and they do that to a certain degree in this viewing period too, because it's only about 30 minutes of practice, so they're not going to put they're going to choose what they want to put on display for us. And for some reason on Tuesday, they allowed us to see essentially live football with all three of the quarterbacks going at it. They weren't tackling each other to the ground, but Danny won the day, or he won that period, I will say, and he has a lot of support. He has a lot of support around Omaha. I think this may be the one time in the next year where we talk about him like this, and it just turns into Dylan's show the rest of the way. But I was happy for him that he got his moment to really show his arm.
Let me ask you this: is the big picture here is who's going to be the quarterback? And I think, just judging by your tone there, we've talked about this plenty before, that we think it's going to be Dylan Raiola. I'm pretty sure about that. So let me ask you this way: is it less locked up than we think it is, or that we have led on prior to seeing them play football? Like they're going to let him battle it out in the traditional way. A coach will tell you, hey, it's going to be a competition and all that stuff. And we expect Dylan Raiola to win that competition. But I think it's really great for Nebraska if Daniel Kaelin, or anybody else for that matter, Heinrich Harburg, can give them something to think about and push. I think about the battle that Adrian Martinez ultimately won in 2018. And I think Tristan Gebbia really made them think about it quite a bit. And so I wonder if we could be, and by the way, that led to Adrian Martinez's best year in a Nebraska uniform. So I wonder if we could be barreling down the road of a maybe slightly similar situation this year.
Yeah, was that the year that Patrick O'Brien was also around in the spring?
He was around in the spring and then left right after the spring game. Yes.
Yeah, so is Heinrich Harburg he's not. I don't think he's going anywhere, but he might be going somewhere as it pertains to the quarterback conversation. I don't think differently about this QB race, this QB situation, than I did before I saw those two freshmen perform out there on Tuesday morning. But it does give you a second of pause. And for those of us who haven't had an opportunity, and I watched Danny play quite a bit in high school and got to know him from interviewing him as well as you can in that setting. I don't think he's just going to back away from this. In fact, I know that from, attending his signing day press conference and see, yesterday, Tuesday out there at practice, you had his quarterbacks coach, Don Tieglin from the Warren Academy was walking around showing support for Danny and some guys. You had a ton of people from the Omaha community, high school coaches, players. Danny has built-in support in this program. Davon Hall, his wide receiver from Bell West, is part of this early enrollee class. Isaiah McMorris is on the way. There's other Bell West guys out there on the team. Thomas Fedoni competed with him, trained with him at the Warren Academy. There's a lot of support for him. And, there's a ton of support for Dylan Raiola too. And that's on a different way. Like, he's got the whole former Nebraska player community, salivating over him because a lot of those guys played with Dominic. But it's going to be interesting to watch this play out, I would say, undoubtedly.
Yep. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I hope they're in for a long sort of battle that, maybe as a result of this, Mitch, Nebraska will get, better quarterback play. I think that's the hope for everybody, at least everybody listening to this podcast. That's for sure. It's
making that spring league more interesting. I saw they're making trades now. I can't follow that. I'm trying, but I can't bring myself to entirely get behind what the spring league is. I hope I heard
there was controversy. There was somebody stealing points. I don't know what's going on over there.
There's gonna be point shaving pretty soon. They're just trying to do whatever they can to make this thing really fun for the fans, and I hope they're enjoying it. I'm a little bit. I'm a somewhat disinterested. I will admit in the Nebraska Spring League, but they're doing a nice job with it. So, hey, we made it through. We made it through one segment here. Please subscribe and follow us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. We also have email. You can send us an email at some point. One of us will check that email and see what's in there and answer questions if you have questions on the show. When we come back, I am going to do something here. I'm going to ask you a provocative question. I think that's the way in these podcast terms that would be termed. So after the break, we're talking about more involving the Nebraska offense.
Hey, Connor, Happer, Mitch, Sherman here for the FanDuel Sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing. Royals are winning games, 5 of which in a row, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets. That is guaranteed. $150, win or lose. Bet on everything under the sun. Slap shots, home runs, slam dunks. Bobby Wood Jr. to get 7 hits in a single game. You could do whatever you'd like on the FanDuel Sportsbook, all on an app that's safe, secure, and user-friendly. So we ask, what are you waiting for? Head to FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet an automatic win. That is at FanDuel, which is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook.
Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube and the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Connor. Royals have won 5 in a row, by the way. I think we should bring this up at that point in this podcast. Watched Salvi's walk-off last night. Fantastic stuff. So back to Nebraska football. Something else that we saw on Tuesday, at least that I saw on Tuesday, some of the others in attendance saw, lots of Nebraska receivers making plays. It wasn't just the quarterbacks, but I mentioned Ja'Cory Barney earlier in the show on the receiving end of a nice pass from Daniel Kaelin. We saw Jamal Banks making plays. We saw Isaiah Nair making a play in the end zone on a ball that was somewhat unlike anything I've seen in a Nebraska game for most of the past 2 seasons. Jalen Lloyd is out there working with what appears to be the first group of receivers. Alex Bullock is a sure-handed guy who's still back. Malachi Coleman is sidelined somewhat this spring, but he's a tall, fast guy who flashed as a true freshman. Demetrius Bell was on the sideline on Tuesday nursing a sore hammy, but he's a dynamic player. And they still have Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda, Jaden Doss. These tight ends are deeper and more talented than what Nebraska's had in recent years. So what do you think is going on here? Have we massively underestimated the Nebraska receivers? Is Garrett McGuire sitting on a gold mine here?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, they got better at the end of last year with the limited, kind of personnel that they had to use at their fingertips, which is, I mean, that's a good sign. That's a sign that you have a good position coach, right? And I'll tell you this, I feel better about, I mean, if you look around offense, position to position, I feel better about the wide receiver group. I feel better about the group of pass catchers than I do about the group of running backs, which is a giant question mark, I think, at this point for Nebraska. So, in order to feel really, really good about a spot, you want to have a guy who's sitting there and you could kind of pencil him in at the top as an all conference. Do they have that? I don't know about that. I don't know about that either. I think, Banks probably takes on a pretty big role in the offense. And, guys coming back from last year. So I think there's still enough question marks at the position just about the guys to where I don't know that I could be like, yeah, it's a loaded group. However, I mean, I've heard really good things, and I saw some iPhone video clips yesterday of Isaiah Nair, which looked pretty sharp. And Barney
that pretty much settles it right there. Right?
I think so. It looked really good to me. And Barney is a guy that pretty much everybody was high on for the recruiting process as well. So I think they could put something together there, but I'm not ready to be like, hey, this is a group that Nebraska is going to have to lead on this year.
Yeah, there were schools in Florida that weren't really excited to see Ja'Cory Barney get away from the Miami area. I think I feel comfortable, Connor, in saying this, that Banks and Nair, the receivers that Nebraska brought in as older players from Wake Forest and then Texas, in the case of Nair via Wyoming, where he made most of his impact as a college player, all of his impact as a college player on the field. I think Banks and Nair are legit players. I don't think you're going to have a situation, outside of injury where one of these guys hits and the other one misses. I feel comfortable on April 10th saying that they have found 2 quality receivers in that group. And that's significant.
That's huge
for the likes of Lloyd, Coleman, Doss, and Bell. That group of receivers that were all true freshmen a year ago, 2 redshirted, 2 played. So they're separated now in class. But those guys, I don't believe that they're quite ready to the point where they can just take over as like your go-to receivers who have to do everything for you at that position. But when you add in Banks and Nair, big guys who have experience, who have won in their careers, have the right attitude, especially in the case of Banks. He's been he's been a dog, I guess is the way that they refer to it in the offseason training, leading everybody. That's such a huge thing for those young receivers.
And we often think about, like, in college football in the offseason, we think about what were you last year and then what are you going to be this year, and you base this year's opinion on what they were like last year. I will remind people that Nebraska had horrendous quarterback play last year, and that did not help wide receivers. Now they were beat up, and they were young, especially at the end of the year there, and that group took a lot of hits. But maybe you see a little bit of the fruits of that that what they built at the end of last year, and then you add on hopefully competent quarterback play. The quote from what was it last week at practice where they're getting that short passing game going a little bit. Last year Nebraska's offense was pretty much reduced to run the ball for like a yard or two and then try and manufacture a deep shot to Jalen Lloyd or Malachi Coleman, and that was kind of it. So if they could get a consistent flow going with the offense, it's both beneficial to the wide receiver, and obviously you have the responsibility of the wide receiver as well, getting better. But quarterback play, I feel like we're not going to be able to talk about anything, Mitch, without talking about quarterback play, just because of how much better it's going to be than it was last year.
I actually saw Marcus Satterfield take a little bit of heat, a little bit of flack. Like if you're basing it off of my social media mentions and comments on stories that I wrote in The Athletic, when he made the remark in spring practice this month that Nebraska is going to have to be able to throw the ball. People went back to the whole, no, they got to run the ball. And they're going to just because you want to throw the ball and you feel that you need to throw the ball as a program in the Big Ten, it doesn't mean that you're giving up on the run. Yeah. Nebraska absolutely must throw the football.
Yes.
And Satterfield was making this comment in reference to some of the struggles late in games last season. Like he talked about the Maryland game. We remember the Wisconsin game. 4 of Nebraska's 5 close losses last year, and I'm taking out the Michigan game and the Colorado game. 4 of the 5 close losses, the last offensive play for Nebraska was an interception. So that's what he's talking about. And that's where you need good quarterback play and good receiver play. And here we are, like 7 practices into the spring, and it looks like there's optimism in that area.
Michigan won a national championship last year. Everybody looks at Michigan and like, man, that team runs the ball. They run the ball. They run the ball. They ran it, 60% of the time, right? Like you still have to throw it the other 40%. That's because
remember when JJ McCarthy had more touchdown passes than interceptions last year? Yeah, he could throw it okay.
Yes. So I am sorry to inform people that Nebraska will indeed have to throw the football some this year with their 5-star quarterback potentially, so that'll help too.
Yeah, one other thought on the receiving game, and I want to mention Thomas Fidone because he's listed as a tight end, but I think Fidone and he's gonna play. He's going to play some receiver along with Carter Nelson, the freshman who's coming in out of Ainsworth. Those guys are like hybrid players. Fidone yesterday, and we haven't talked about Heinrich Harburg, but in a drill with Harburg, and in the same drill where we saw Kaelin do well, and Dylan Raiola also made some nice plays. He made a nice throw to Jamal Banks to move the chains on kind of a disjointed drive for the offense that wasn't entirely his fault. They didn't score on that drive, but Harburg threw one over the middle. It wasn't a great throw. It was kind of an up for grabs ball, and Fidone was the intended receiver. There were a couple of defensive players in the area, and Thomas got a hand on it, or somebody got a hand on it, and then Thomas actually went up and tipped the ball to himself and came down with it for a completion. That's the kind of stuff that I saw him do and that we saw him do at Lewis Central in Council Bluffs. So if you can add that element to your pass game, in addition to what they're starting to show with these receivers, or what we think they're starting to show with these receivers, then That's obviously pretty good. So after the break, Connor, we're going to talk a little defense, and if there's a star in the making for Nebraska on Tony White's side of the football. Hey, have you ever had a frustrating experience buying tickets to a game, like to a baseball game, possibly? Last year, I took my family over our spring break to New York City, and we went to a Yankees game. Beautiful stadium, great baseball environment. Really, just one problem: I couldn't get an awesome understanding going into the game of exactly what it was going to be like to be in our seats. Was it in the sun? Was it in the shade? I didn't know what I was buying entirely. Because I didn't use the Game Time app. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets easier and faster. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down closer the closer you get to first pitch. Check it out. Check it out at gametime.co. Download the app. They've got last minute deals, views from every seat, fantastic interface, tickets for baseball games, other sporting events, concerts, comedy. You can get Nebraska football tickets on there, theater events, all in pricing, no fees at checkouts, flexible customer service. It's all there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On College. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the app today. Lowest price guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman, third segment here as we'll get you out of here on a Wednesday. Let's go back to Tuesday and listening to Evan Cooper talk yesterday. He dropped one on us. Let's talk about Nebraska's defense for a second. The quote was, Isaac Gifford is one of the best players in the country. Pretty soon, you guys will see. I will say this off the top, Mitch. I have been a fan of Isaac Gifford for several years now. I watched him play a lot of football, called a lot of his games at Lincoln Southeast. And the recruiting process for him, even though his big brother was at Nebraska, it never really took off for him until way, way late. And I thought, and even then there was the conversation about him and what was he going to do? Is he going to play safety? Is he going to play linebacker? Is he big enough to do this? Is he fast enough to do this? And I thought, I don't care about any of that stuff. That guy can play football and he's always around it. He's making plays all the time. And what do you know? He's a contributor right away at Nebraska. I'm not surprised by any of this. And I listen to Evan Cooper when he says stuff like that, because that's a pretty good praise from him. But I'm a huge believer in Isaac Gifford. If there's one guy on this team who you're like, whoa, he can really make a difference. He's on the very short list, Mitch.
It could be him. I mean, there's a few guys on that defense. I'd look at like the guys up front, but in the secondary, yeah. I mean, Tommy Hill's in that conversation too. But Isaac plays a position, that nickel spot, that to me is just like so important to the defense. I think the nickel and the jack linebacker, they hold huge keys for just what Nebraska's able to do and what it wants to do in Tony White's defense and creating chaos. It's like the connecting point between the second level and the third level, and then the connecting point between the first level and the second level. But I will ask you, as a connoisseur of the Giffords, did Isaac get this from Luke? Like, is this just like a continuation of the Gifford style of play in Nebraska football, or has he taken it? Will he take it to another level?
Well, he does it. I mean, Luke was so rangy and I think they both had the same kind of like head for the football, whatever that, like, instincts, I guess is what we're talking about there. But physically they're like different. They look a little bit different. And Luke was such an interesting player because I think he could give you a little bit of that pass rush element too, could kind of cover. He played a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. Isaac moves around a little bit quicker back there. He's a little shorter. Arms are a little shorter. But the connecting piece with those two is that instinct. And they absolutely both have it. And Luke was a late bloomer too. And Isaac is taking a little bit of that on. So it's not a surprise to me that we're seeing this emergence from this guy.
My thought, if Evan Cooper says it, I'm listening. He's
Mhm.
just got like this such a cool customer vibe to him, that if I was being recruited by him, I would want to just listen to whatever he said. If he was my position coach, even if he wasn't my position coach, you see Coop sometimes working, and this was in the period that we viewed on Tuesday. He's working with like the D linemen and the linebackers on a drill where they pick up fumbles off the ground. Like he would lay a ball on the ground and they would have to run by and pick it up, like a scoop and score kind of situation. That's not just for DBs. I've had kind of mixed thoughts on whether I think he's a future defensive coordinator or if he's just more valuable in this role where he evaluates all of your personnel. I mean, we remember the stories about Coop, and they continue. He's the guy who offered Jalen Lloyd really before he'd even been announced as a coach at Nebraska, before Cooper had been announced as a coach at Nebraska. He was telling Matt Rule to take the Nebraska job so Cooper could then get on the phone and offer Jalen Lloyd a scholarship. And look at what Jalen Lloyd did as a freshman and the way that he's positioning himself for his sophomore year. Same thing with Jeremiah Charles. He was the guy there in the gym at a high school basketball game who was looking at Jeremiah Charles, not even in a game, but in warmups, and going, all right, what is this? And, he needs to play college football at Nebraska. They weren't there to see him. They were there to see, his teammate, Ishmael Smith-Flores at Arlington Martin High School. So, and now he's got Jeremiah Charles in his secondary. He fought for him. The receivers group wanted him. Cooper wanted him, and really not a surprise when you consider his dynamic with Matt Rule, but Cooper won the battle to get Charles. So if he says that about Isaac Gifford, that Isaac Gifford's gonna light up the Big Ten, then I tend to want to believe him.
Well, he's got an eye for talent and an eye for projection, right? Like Matt Rule, out of all the assistants, when Rule's talking about personnel and or maybe even recruiting stories, Evan Cooper is always the guy that comes up. He's like, Coop got in my ear and he said this and he said that and he begged me to do this and he begged me to do that. So like he's really opinionated. It feels like on who he believes in. I wonder if he's opinionated on who he doesn't believe in, but we always hear about the guys who he does. And for him to heap that kind of praise on Isaac Gifford, like that, I think that means something. And that's pretty important. That's not just a coach just sticking up for one of his guys. I don't think that's real.
Yeah. And I'll finish with this on Coop. Like I mentioned this story in our first episode about Mike Minner that I wrote, and the former Nebraska 2-time national champ, longtime NFL player, last decade been the head coach of the Campbell Camels in the FCS. Coop was the one guy that Minner just couldn't stop talking about in our interview. When Minner watched the Nebraska practices, he was raving about Evan Cooper and the ability that he has to coach 5 positions on the defense. And if anybody knows how difficult that is, it's Mike Minner. That's half the defense, or it's almost half of the entire defense. And Cooper does that and does it well, and does it in a way Minter said that keeps everyone in the same place. Like Minter watched the film and said they were all lined up in the right place on every play, and that's a credit to their position coach. And then when he got the chance to go out and watch Nebraska practice, he was even more impressed with Evan Cooper. So lots of praise for Evan Cooper, lots of praise from Evan Cooper for Isaac Gifford and others in that secondary. But Gifford, I think, and we heard from him too, is the leader back there. He's the vocal leader. He's the heartbeat right now of that Nebraska defensive backfield. So that's going to do it for our show here today. If you are watching us on YouTube, please be sure to go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and download. If you're listening to us, check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Twitter at Locked On NEB. We will see you on Thursday. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today. It's now available on the free Fire TV channels app.